try to project a little more. I realized when I watched the last video this morning that it was a little hard to hear, so it wasn't quite loud enough. So I'll try to project a little bit more. Okay, this is the subject on salaries. This was the argument, like I said, this was the argument that Benjamin Franklin had with Hamilton. Hamilton believed in the convention that they needed to pay the executive branch a large sum of money because that was the only way to get the brightest and the best. And Benjamin Franklin decided that he would impart his wisdom on these young kids. He was in his 80s. He was the only one that was in his 80s. All the rest of them were in their 30s and 40s. And what he has to say was true then, it's true today, and it's going to be true throughout history. It really shows the natural nature of man and what it's all about. And he punches holes all through Hamilton's argument. And I think it's just a tremendous speech. The Constitutional Convention in Committee of the Whole, speech in the convention on the subject of salaries, Saturday, June 2nd, 1787. Sir, it is with reluctance that I rise to express a disappropriation of any one article of the plan for which we are so much obliged to the honorable gentleman who laid it before us. He's talking about the Constitution. From its first reading, I have borne a good will to it, and in general wished it success. In this particular of salaries to the executive branch, I happen to differ. And as my opinion may appear new and chimerical, it is only from a persuasion that it is right, and from a sense of duty that I hazard it. The committee will judge of my reasons when they have heard them, and their judgment may possibly change mine. I think I see inconveniences in the appointment of salaries. I see none in refusing them, but on the contrary, great advantages. Sir, there are two passions which have a powerful influence on the affairs of men. These are ambition and avarice, the love of power and the love of money. Separately, each of these has great force in promoting men to action, but when united in view of the same object, they have in many minds the most violent effects. Place before the eyes of such men a post of honor that shall be at the same time a place of profit, and they will move heaven and earth to obtain it. The vast number of such places it is that renders the British government so tempestuous. The struggles for them are the true sources of all those factions which are perpetually dividing the nation, distracting its councils, hurrying sometimes into fruitless and mischievous wars, and often compelling a submission to dishonorable terms of peace. And of what kind are the men that will strive for this profitable preeminence? Through all the bustle of cabal, the heat of contention, the infinite mutual abuse of parties, tearing to pieces the best of characters. It will not be the wise and moderate, the lovers of peace and good order, the men fittest for the trust. It will be the bold and the violent, the men of strong passions and indefatigable activity in their selfish pursuits. These will thrust themselves into your government and be your rulers. And these too will be mistaken in the expected happiness of their situation, for their vanquished competitors of the same spirit and from the same motives will perpetually be endeavoring to distrust their administration, thwart their measures, and render them odious to the people. Boy, that could be written for today, could it not? See, when we study history, we have to understand that the human condition hasn't changed one bit. And what man was then, man is now, and what man will always be. And this is very much self-evident truth on the condition of mankind. That's one thing I like about our founders. They didn't judge the natural nature of man, good or bad. They just knew what it was. And so in understanding what it was, they decided to put also natural law, checks and balances in place because the natural nature of man was not going to change. So how does this fit with today? With understanding that our own administration, our own American administration, more than likely blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that not an act of war? And if that's the case, isn't Congress supposed to vote on that first? And if Congress didn't, is that not an act of treason? It won't be the peace-loving men that thrust themselves into those positions. It'll be the bold and the violent. Where are we at? Besides these evils, sir, though we may set out in the beginning with moderate salaries, we shall find that such will not be of long continuance. Reasons will never be wanting for proposed augmentations, and there will always be a party for giving more to the rulers, that the rulers may be able in return to give more to them. Can you say lobbyists? Hence, as all history informs us, there has been in every state and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and the governed. The one striving to obtain more for its support and the other to pay less. And this has alone occasioned great convulsions, actual civil wars, ending either in dethroning of the princes or enslaving of the people. Generally, indeed, the ruling power carries its point, the revenues of princes constantly increasing, and we see that they are never satisfied, but always in want of more. The more the people are discontented with the oppression of taxes, the greater the need the prince has of money to distribute among his partisans and pay the troops that are to suppress all resistance and enable him to plunder at pleasure. There is scarce a king in 100 who would not, if he could, follow the example of Pharaoh, get first all the people's money, then all their lands, and then make them and their children servants forever. It will be said that we don't propose to establish kings. I know it, but there is a natural inclination in mankind to kingly government. It sometimes relieves them from aristocratic domination. They had rather have one tyrant than 500 or 545. It gives more of the appearance of equality among citizens, and that they like. I am apprehensive, therefore, perhaps too apprehensive, that the government of these states may in future times end in a monarchy. But this catastrophe, I think, may be long delayed if in our proposed system we do not sow the seeds of contention, faction, and tumult by making our posts of honor places of profit. If we do, I fear though we do employ at first a number and not a single person, the number will in time be set aside. It will only nourish the foetus of a king, as the honorable gentleman from Virginia very aptly expressed it, and a king will the sooner be set over us. Now, a king doesn't have to be one person. In fact, there's never been a true monarchy ever in the history of the world. There's never been one person with all of the power. They always have their nobles or their parliaments, or they have other people that help them rule, do they not? In most places, we call that an oligarchy. And an oligarchy is the most famous form of government throughout the world. It may be imagined by some that this is a utopian idea, and that we can never find men to serve us in the executive department without paying them well for their services. I conceive this to be a mistake. Some existing facts present themselves to me, which incline me to a contrary opinion. The High Sheriff of a county in England is an honorable office, but it is not a profitable one. It is rather expensive and therefore not sought for, but yet it is executed and well executed, and usually by some of the principal gentlemen of the county. In France, the office of the counselor or member of their judiciary parliaments is more honorable. It is therefore purchased at a high price. There are indeed fees on the law proceedings, which are divided among them, but these fees do not amount to more than 3% on the sum paid for the place. Therefore, as legal interest is there at 5%, they in fact pay 2% for being allowed to do the judiciary business of the nation, which is at the same time entirely exempt from the burden of paying them any salaries for their services. I do not, however, mean to recommend this as an eligible mode for our judiciary department. I only bring the instance to show that the pleasure of doing good and serving their country and the respect such conduct entitles them to are sufficient motives with some minds to give up a great portion of their time to the public without the mean inducement of pecuniary satisfaction. Another instance is that of a respectable society who have made the experiment and practiced it with success more than 100 years. I mean the Quakers. It is an established rule with them that they are not to go to law, but in their controversies they must apply to their monthly, quarterly, and yearly meetings. Committees of these set with patience to hear the parties and spend much time in composing their differences. In doing this, they are supported by a sense of duty and the respect paid to selflessness. It is honorable to be so employed, but it was never made profitable by salaries, fees, or prerequisites. And indeed, in all cases of public service, the less the profit, the greater the honor. To bring the matter nearer home, have we not seen the great and most important of our offices, that of general of our armies, executed for 8 years together without the smallest salary, by a patriot whom I will not now offend by any other praise, and this through fatigues and distresses in common with the other brave men, his military friends and companions, and the constant anxieties peculiar to his station? And shall we doubt finding 3 or 4 men in all the United States with public spirit enough to bear sitting in peaceful council for perhaps an equal term, merely to preside over our civil concerns and see that our laws are duly executed? Sir, I have a better opinion of our country. I think we shall never be without a sufficient number of wise and good men to undertake and execute well and faithfully the office in question. Sir, the saving of the salaries that may at first be proposed is not an object with me. The subsequent mischiefs of proposing them are what I apprehend. And therefore it is that I move the amendment. If it is not seconded or accepted, I must be contented with the satisfaction of having delivered my opinion frankly and done my duty. Dr. Benjamin Franklin, Constitutional Convention, June 2nd, 1787. I don't know that there is ever a speech that had any more truth in it than that speech alone. And we're suffering from exactly what he warned us of then, now in our government today, both local and federal. How is it that AOC could go and be a congresswoman from a bartender, and when she first got to Washington couldn't even afford an apartment? And now her personal wealth is over $1 million. How does that happen on $176,000 a year, which I will contend is probably 5 times too much for what they do?
It's wise investment.
It's not, yeah, it's either wise investment or it means that they are above the same law that Martha Stewart went to prison for. And didn't we learn from the 1100s Charter of Liberty that if the king is not under the same rule as the people, that it is evil and oppressive? So why 1,000 years later is it not the same? It is. How did we allow our republic to get here?
Got lazy.
We got lazy. We did exactly what Rome did. When we were able to keep more of our wealth and have more free time, we were more than happy to allow the government to do what we should be doing as citizens, which are a duty for us. This is why Benjamin Franklin, when he left the State House and a woman walked up to him and said, "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us?" And he said, "Madam, you have a republic if you can keep it." And boy, was he right then. What have we done to keep our republic? Vote every 4 years and don't worry about it until then? Look, if it's going to trickle down, it's got to trickle down from your local government. I know I beat this horse to death, but your local government is the top government. Just as in Hillsdale, you can see the tyranny that we have there. We can see the people that are abusing their power, that think that somehow they're the kings and the people of Hillsdale County are the serfs. Why? Because it's my fault. Because I haven't done enough to stand up. It's not incumbent on anyone else, it's on me. If it is to be, it is up to me. 90% of keeping your republic is showing up. 10% is speaking up. This speech probably depicts human nature better than any other speech I've ever come across. And Franklin was a very wise old man. Very wise. He understood human nature. He understood what we would devolve into. But in this debate, Hamilton won. And we can't understand why we've got so many millionaires and billionaires that are supposed to be our servants that have become our rulers and masters. The violent and the bold. Not the peace-loving, not the gentle, but the violent and the bold. And we can't understand how filthy our politics have become. What do you expect? What do we expect? We need to start making these positions of honor and not positions of profit. I'm a big believer that anybody that runs for an office should get nothing more than his stipends to eat on. Other than that, you raise your hand, you volunteer to do a duty unto the people. Franklin himself said a man should volunteer and do a duty unto the people, creating laws, and then go back to his business and live under the laws he created. He said this and only this creates just law. So why do you think you have unjust law when you've got a president that's never worked a day in his life? He's always been in politics. And let's not forget base root words that come from the Greek and the Latin. Poly means many, and ticks are blood-sucking leeches. So what do we have with politics? Exactly that. So, teach your children this speech. Teach the people around you this speech and why it's so important to have honor. And why it's so important to have positions of honor. And why that we should not have a two-tiered legal system. When they commit crime, they need to be under the same law as the people. If they're not, it's tyranny. It's despotic. It's evil and oppressive. And we've known it for 1,000 years. So, I know it was kind of a short class, but I think this is a very important speech to hear and to listen. And if you go back to your handout and look at the self-evident truths and find out just how many of those self-evident truths Franklin hit in that speech. He hit them all. And that's why it's such a powerful speech. So, are there any questions, comments, criticism? Go ahead.
Do you think that if they would have listened to Benjamin Franklin back in the day, we'd have a little bit better term limits?
Absolutely. I don't know that we would have term limits. See, what happened was everything, if you study politics all the way up through, we didn't have any problems with people spending 20, 30, 40, 50 years in government prior to the 17th Amendment. That's because we were a full republic. The 17th Amendment shoved us halfway into a direct democracy. And democracies are transitional governments. They're short-lived. They've always been incompatible with liberty. Madison said they are as tumultuous in their lives as they are violent in their deaths. And democracies take us to a revolution, a socialist revolution. Every time. In fact, when we get into the last 6 video series, you're going to find out that there's communist leaders that talk about that they like democracies because democracies bring about socialist revolutions. And if we study all of the countries that have fallen to socialist revolution, and the ones that we've helped follow the socialist revolution, is because they implemented democracy. So the 17th Amendment was a horrible amendment. Well, how did it get passed? Because the people were happy to be ignorant of what their duty was as a citizen, to know the history and to know their government, and to keep their government in check. That's why we're where we're at. We've become lazy. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? Thank you all very much for coming tonight. I know this was a short class, but it gives you a lot to think about. And I think it's a very important speech because it hits all of those self-evident truths. It hits all of the natural nature of man and why, when man is in charge of the law, it is never just. This is why our founders wanted self-evident truth, checks and balances within that document. But through the 20th century, we spent an entire century taking those little tiny checks and balances out of the Constitution. Go ahead.
You said something in there about honor over the money.
Yes. Positions of honor rather than profit.
I only know of one president that did.
Yeah, that was the last one.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. He's the only one that got poorer in government. And if we go back to what one of the heralded Democrat presidents said, JFK said, anybody that gets rich in government is a crook. You got a whole 10 square mile area of crooks. Go ahead.
I think it's Hosea 4:6 says, my people will be destroyed for their
Lack of knowledge.
It's not just biblical knowledge.
No, it's not. But we have to be strengthened both spiritually, mentally, and physically. Those are the 3 parts of man. So we have to be strong in all 3 areas. If we're not strong in all 3 areas, then because of lack of knowledge, because of lack of health, because of lack of spirit, we will fall. Go ahead.
Look at how many people are eating junk right now because they lack knowledge of what to eat. They're popping pills left and right because they don't have the knowledge of what's even in the, what the pharmaceutical companies are making. Or they don't even know the origins of what pharma, where it originated from. That's lack of knowledge.
It is. It's also laziness.
Yeah.
We've become a lazy society. We want the instant answer. I get this all the time. When I started Hillsdale Justice Project, I'd have people call me up and go, this is the situation that's going on, what do I do? It's the 21st century. I could pull up Google or DuckDuckGo, put it in there, I'd read them the first thing that came up, and they'd go, you're a genius. No, I'm just not lazy. It's the 21st century. It's not like when I was a kid and you had to do a report and you actually had to go to the library and you had to spend half your afternoon there and you have to go through the Dewey Decimal System to find the very book you wanted, get that, get it down, read through half of a chapter to realize that wasn't what you needed, take it back and put it on the shelf where it came from, go through the Dewey Decimal System, find it again, come down so that you could write 3 sentences of your report. Does anybody else remember that? Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's why my grades were lacking, because I was lazy. I wanted the Cliff Notes.
Now, another point on that is, you get on the social platforms, so where you can talk about all this, and guess what, the bad guys are on there too.
Yeah,
So he's coming in for the first time, looking at this, and he happens to, well, that guy looks like, he starts reading that one, that's one of the bad guys, and he doesn't get the information he really wants.
oh yeah, he does. Here's the problem. We all want to take the first thing we read and go, well, that must be true. No. That's not what we should do.
I had a question. I believe it's Article 5 of the Constitution calls for a convention of states.
Yes,
Do you regard that as a possible solution to some of this situation that's going on, or maybe the clinching nail?
it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
With a double-edged sword, it can either cut your enemy or it can come back and lop your own head off. We got to be very careful with that, because we practice case precedent law now. And there was a case precedent in which we took the entire articles of the government, threw it out, and started all over brand new. It's called the Constitutional Convention. If you remember, we were under the Articles of Confederation at that time. And the whole reason why we had those delegates meet in Pennsylvania was to try to fix the woes of the Articles of Confederation. And what did our founding fathers do? They said, there's no fix to this, it's too broken. And they threw it out. And they completely wrote a new document called the Constitution. Now some people go, oh, we'll have a convention of states and we'll just deal with one thing. I'm sorry, case precedent law. What happens if a group of bad actors get in there and go, you know what, let's throw this whole thing out and we'll start with something different called the Communist Manifesto. Scary, isn't it?
Very possible.
So another one of Ben Franklin's great theories is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And where are we at right now? We're worried about that pound of cure because we didn't pay attention to that ounce of prevention. That ounce of prevention was that knowledge. That ounce of prevention was standing up and speaking up and holding our government to task. They are our employees. We never use the tool of shame. And how many churches preach, don't get involved, just pray about it. Well, I'm sorry, but faith without works is dead. It is absolutely dead. You've got to pray about it, but you've got to get your hands dirty and calloused. That's how it gets done. And you have to have faith. So you have to pray and get involved. That's the only way it works. So we know these truths to be self-evident. But yet, we yearn for the instant food. We yearn for the drive-through. We yearn for the secret pill to make us all well. If it feels good, do it, right? That was the 60s. We wanted freedom without morality. And this is what it brings. No liberty. You can't have liberty unless you have freedom coupled with morality. What was the feminist movement all about? We want equal rights, just not equal responsibility. But you can't have one without the other. With equal rights come equal responsibility. We've been trying to do just half of what's required. And this is where we're at. So,